Welcome to the Property Bible. This show was created for current property owners, people looking to purchase property, and for professionals in the industry. Hope you enjoy. Welcome back to the Property Bible. My name is Kimberly Ackerman. I'm a buyer's agent from Sydney, New South Wales. Now, today we're going to be talking about pre-purchase due diligence. It's one of my favourite topics, and this is part one of pre-purchase due diligence segment that I'm going to be having over the next few episodes. So, person I want to introduce to you today is someone I work with quite a fair bit. His name is Joshua Mulders, and he's an architect from Alchemy Architecture. Welcome, Josh.
Hi, Kim.
Hi.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So, Josh, you and I worked quite a bit over the last couple of years, and you've been an architect now for almost 30 years now?
30 yes, 30 plus years.
It's a fair bit. So you've got a lot of knowledge about the architecture space and when it comes to properties and looking at extending and so forth. So I sort of hit a gold mine finding you through some due diligence I was doing for a client. And I reached out to your company and you were able to come at very short notice to come and check out a site that we were looking at. So
that's right.
I'm very thankful for that. But what I want to talk about today is pre-purchase due diligence. So when someone goes to buy a property and they don't know what they can and can't do on that particular lot, specifically residential houses, we're looking at for this topic. So being able to look at something before they sign on the dotted line and say, can we go up? Can we extend out? Can we put a driveway in? These sorts of things, a lot of people don't realize that someone like yourself can come in and give you some guidelines on what you can and can't do.
The Building Code of Australia, or National Construction Code, is part of a whole gamut of things we need to sort of navigate through. But there's examples with that particular code which can restrict development, especially when it comes to, say, attic conversions. And we do come across that a fair amount. So you'll get a property, or you get a somebody who's bought a property that says, oh, we've got this roof space and, we want to go in here and we want to create a double bedroom. Now, there's components of the National Construction Code which will say, look, to make that a habitable space, legal habitable space, you have to have a certain ceiling height. You have to have a certain amount of natural light and ventilation, and there's formulas to be able to calculate that. So where you're sort of looking at a space, or somebody's up through the manhole and looking at the rafters and the insulation going, well, this looks big enough. It might not be. Because of those codes.
Correct.
So you can say, no, well, you can't get a habitable space up here. Or if it's a habitable space in that roof, and agents do fit it out as a bedroom, legally it might not be a bedroom.
That's a big one.
That's a big one. Yeah.
So I find that a lot of the National Building Code, for example, deals with internal livable space, for example, and what you can and can't do, how big's the space, and what you can and can't make into bedrooms or change walls and all that sort of stuff going forward. The next thing, which I find deals more with the external space or the community space, and how the different properties are affecting each other, is obviously the council regulations, which is a separate sort of item.
Absolutely. Look, there's always overlap with those particular two components, but from the outset, when people come to you or me and they're looking at property, the majority of the information that will impact anything that they can do are those council legislative regulatory issues. Now, there's sort of two areas of it, which is Local Environmental Plan, LEP, which is statutory regulation, and there's Council Developmental Control Plan, which is relatively flexible with council, as long as you can, persuade them or show them that what you're trying to do is appropriate and it doesn't adversely impact or go beyond to adversely impact anyone else. So, but it is predominantly an exterior type of, analysis of a property.
And I think another component or sort of subcomponent of the council regulations is the heritage items and the heritage conservation areas, which are a big thing.
Yeah.
And look, I just recently, a few days ago, with a client of mine, purchased a really beautiful Victorian terrace in the inner west of Sydney in a heritage conservation area. And obviously he has a lot of questions around what can and can't we do, which is different for every property in every area. But I guess, would it be fair to say, generally speaking, a heritage item or a heritage building has a lot more quirks and difficulties than, say, a heritage conservation area, which mainly focuses on the external look and preserving that look on the street?
Good point. That is a good point. So typically speaking, you would, if the building was an item, you're restricted from the exterior, obviously, but also parts of the interior.
Yeah.
Depending on the fabric. If it has a 70s edition, clearly a 70s edition on the back of that heritage item, you could probably clearly argue that that wasn't part of the original fabric, and it can be removed to make way for a new edition.
Yeah.
But if you've got elements within an item inside, even though they don't comply, like typically you might get a stair in a heritage item and it's as steep as all hell, and you're going, saying, okay, well, these are dangerous and we should be able to remove them. You might not be able to remove them because of the heritage order that's placed on that building. Where if you've got just a building which is of good condition in a conservation area, the council will have a viewpoint of the facade only.
Yeah. Which is a bit easier to get around.
A little bit easier to get around. If you buy a property which is a heritage item, you really need to go in with your eyes wide open, knowing that you will be restricted. Part of this building is owned by or through the heritage order.
And some of those buildings are beautiful.
Absolutely.
And some of those facades are beautiful. And it's kind of nice that they have some of those restrictions to maintain that look in that particular area.
Yes.
I mean, a good example is the one that you and I worked on in Balmain.
Yes.
For some clients of mine.
Yep.
We went through that home. It was cute little cottage and they loved it, but they sort of said to me, Kim, we would only look at purchasing this if we could possibly extend or go up or add another bedroom at some stage or another. And you and your team did a lot of due diligence on that. You came and met us on site. We went through that property in detail and you very specifically let them know, look, guys, there's a low chance that you're going to be able to do these things that you want to do. And that was sort of a no-brainer for them. And we moved on to something else that allowed them to do those extensions that they needed to do. So I find your service really invaluable, and some other architects do the same sort of thing. But I think people don't realize that you can hire someone like yourself in quite a very short amount of time. So you're not jeopardizing the purchase of a property. Get these things done, look into it in more detail and have an idea of what you can and can't do before you even sort of put $1 down on the property.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But another big thing which we talk about sometimes is trees.
Trees are a big deal.
Trees.
Showstopper.
People don't realize how big of a deal trees are, whether they might be protected trees on that land or nearby the lot that you're purchasing that basically have roots growing underneath that house or that backyard. So if you could tell us a little bit more about that particular area.
So trees are broad. Look, trees, let's just say in the inner west, are highly valued. You know, council down there have a viewpoint that the canopy is slowly being diminished in that municipality. So they regard trees, especially endemic Indigenous trees, extremely highly. Other municipalities like Ku-ring-gai, they have plenty of trees, and if you've got canopy cover, they'll say, okay, well, your backyard has a certain amount of canopy coverage and we'll allow you to take out X and Y trees. But going back to trees in general, let's use the inner west as an example. A tree in the rear yard where you're thinking of extending that property out can impact how far you can go.
Right.
Now you can build up to the tree, but then what comes into play is engineering over those roots. So what happens?
Crazy.
Look, then what happens is costs can get expensive. So your engineering component gets extremely expensive, and where you've got a budget of doing, elements to the rear, it can quickly blow out.
And that's the thing. People see, well, a lot of people that I come across see a tree in a backyard of a property they're thinking of buying, or in their existing property that they own, and think, oh, we'll just extend out, get rid of that tree, do this, this and that. If 100%. That tree is protected or it can't be removed for some reason, they will literally have to engineer around those roots of that tree, which could be, this far or this far.
Yeah, absolutely.
You just don't really know. So
100%.
It's a big thing to take into consideration. Someone like yourself, that's part of what you do and part of that due diligence process, depending on how deep you want to go into it.
Absolutely.
Another really big thing is the floor to space ratio, which we always talk about.
Yeah, look, floor to space ratio, every site has there's a formula where you can calculate the amount of habitable space over 2 levels you can build. That includes the existing part of the house and what you're wanting to intend to do at the back. That has a bearing on the bulk and scale of what you can achieve. And then that has a bearing on overshadowing. So a lot of these dense areas in the inner west have,
like a line of terraces.
Everyone's quite closely, there's close proximity between everyone. Council are trying to establish privacy and also access to sunlight. And, there are typically what we do is use the calculators to be able to establish an envelope which we can build within. So we understand then, if we are to build within this envelope, there won't be adverse impact on your neighbour through their window to their living space at the rear, or what's termed their private open space rear yard at the back.
Yeah.
So there's particular legislative components which guide what you can and can't do around that. So calculating that amount of space is, also another thing which can either, restrict you or not. There's been circumstances where we've had to minus a bedroom from the upper level, which can be a big deal.
Oh yeah,
sure. I want a 4-bedroom house and X, Y, and Z, and because of one particular neighbour's window and the orientation of the site, we've had to say, look, you can only get 3, and this is the way, these are the reasons why.
Yeah, and just to sort of clarify that area, basically for every lot that has a house on it, for the land size you're looking at, there's a ratio of how much floor space within the footprint of the home, whether it's 1 level or 3 levels, in comparison to the land itself. So that floor to space ratio is different for every property, and there are ways you can look that up yourselves. Normal people can look that up and look into it. And then the overshadowing, correct me if I'm wrong, but is how your particular property is going to affect the sunlight of the neighbouring properties near you. So that's another big thing that needs to be taken into consideration when people are changing their property or looking at changing, extending, going up, all those sorts of things. Something I found really interesting, which we've covered before, is the fact that sometimes when you go through the overshadowing in quite a lot of detail, especially for things like when you're challenging a DA. I had a client recently that contacted me. Basically, he had a neighbour. This is, a year or 2 down the track. He had a neighbour that was extending, and he wasn't happy with those extensions. And so he wanted a way to challenge that DA. Talk to us a little bit about how the models.
So there is, the 3D modelling. So look, we occasionally will get clients coming to us, either existing clients that'll say, hey, look, my neighbour's, got a DA and it's, it looks like it's going to impact and overshadow
and what can I do
our
about
yard.
That?
What can we do? So everybody has an opportunity under a development application to object. So there's a neighbour notification period, and even if you can object outside that notification period, the planners at council have to take it on board. But the only way to categorically argue that development does not comply is by modelling that particular DA and the
physically
subject,
modeling it.
Well, you model it in 3D.
Yeah, amazing.
So we take data from the plans to be able to then create it in a 3D model, and then within that program we can press a button and say, look, the sunlight at that time does not comply. These are the regulations.
Yeah.
It needs to fit within this. It doesn't comply, and this is how we can show that and argue that, yeah, look, it's a breach.
Yeah, that's
so
amazing.
Then, that bulk and scale is a breach. It needs to be taken into consideration from the planner, and then that architect or the designer that's put that application in, or the owner, will need to do amendments to make it comply. Yeah. So that can be done.
So I guess to wrap up this segment and give people some tips on, if they're thinking of hiring someone like yourself as an architect, or they're thinking of doing some of it themselves, some of the different things that they can look at. The floor to space ratio, you can work out through the planning portal. Is that right?
You can get
for
the
New South
information
Wales?
through council, council websites and planning portal.
Council websites, planning portal, be able to tell you, look up that specific property and tell you exactly what the floor to space ratio is for that particular property. We've also, in order to identify if a property is heritage listed,
again, you can do searches on that property.
On the planning portal.
On planning portal,
And also for New South Wales, I know you can look at the heritage register for New South Wales, and it's different for every state, obviously.
Yes, it is.
Another thing is looking at neighbouring properties and seeing if they've already set the precedents for what you're wanting to do. I have a gentleman that's looking at putting a buyer that we just bought for, looking at putting a driveway at the back from the rear lane, and every single neighbour has done the same thing already. So that's a big one, setting the precedents already. And also really the section 10.7 of a contract of sale.
Yes.
That's going to tell you a lot of these things.
It's got a lot of great information.
So most people don't read contracts of sale. I know I do.
Don't read all the rest. Just read the 10.7.
Read the 10.7. It's going to give you some of this information already to save you researching it, and really be able to give you a snapshot of that property to see, what am I looking at buying? And if you're wanting to look further and you're wanting to do changes to the footprint of that property, you can hire an architect to do some pre-purchase due diligence and give you some pretty clarified answers on what you may and may not be able to do going forward.
So look, everything is subject to council approval. There's a lot of balls in the air.
Exactly, Josh. And look, thank you for joining us today. This is really part 1 of pre-purchase due diligence, which is a big thing that I look at when I'm looking at purchasing property with my clients. Josh, you've been a great help today, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Learn things from you all the time. Tune in next time for part 2 of pre-purchase due diligence. We're going to go through the pests and building side of things and learn a bit more information about what to look for when you're looking at these pests and building reports, and how to assess it yourself moving forward. So thank you.